Welcome back to Introduction to Psychology. So today we will begin our exploration of Chapter 4 on sensation and perception. First, let me take a look at our lecture schedule. You see, here's the original one from the syllabus and my adapted lecture schedule. And so we have now finished Chapter 3. And we're starting Chapter 4, and I'm going to do this over 4 lectures, starting today, going through next week, and ending just before the study break. So I have about 60 slides and 4 lectures, so I'm going to try to get to about slide 15 by the end of the lecture today. Sensation is the detection of physical energy by the sense organs. Okay? How you feel with your fingers, hear with your ears, see with your eyes. And right, it's about how stimuli from the external environment come in to your central nervous system. Perception is about your brain's interpretation of raw sensory data. And that's pretty magical because it involves combining information from a lot of different sense modalities and building it into some kind of a picture that also draws on your general knowledge and your past experience. So there's a lot about perception that is construction. The difference between sensation and perception is the difference between how light enters your eye and is focused on the retina and stimulates retinal cells to fire and send a message up the optic nerve. And that's transduction. Okay. Transduction is about how stimuli from the environment are converted into that electrochemical language of the nervous system. Perception is like your experience of seeing a rainbow. Out there in the real world, there are wavelengths of light, but your experience of color, of green, of blue is a matter of perception. That part is in your head. And different animals, even different humans, might not perceive those colors in the same way or even at all. And since our perceptions are constructed by our minds, there's a lot of ways that they can be significantly off from reality, right? To the point that we can be fooled. And we call those illusions. And we'll look at some when we go through this chapter. So all your senses rely on a handful of principles. Basically, the external stimulus is received by a sense receptor. So there are touch receptors in your fingers. There are light receptors in your retina. There are receptors in your ear that respond to vibrations. Okay. And then the activation of those receptors will be converted into neural activity. Okay. And into that electrochemical signaling language of your nervous system. Activation is highest when we just detect a stimulus. So if I were to turn on a noisy fan, you would hear that. Okay, that'd get your attention. But then you adapt to it, and that sensory neuron that was initially like, whoa, and picking up that, sending a message that you can hear the fan, is actually going to slow down, calm down, and stop doing that. And you're going to stop being aware of the fan until I turn it off. And then you'll be like, whoa, what's that? What just changed? So your mind is adapted to notice changes in your environment, which is good because that could mean that, danger is coming. But you do adapt to things that are around you, even to the point that you don't really notice them anymore. And in fact, your sensory receptors are being bombarded by an amazing amount of information, and very little of that is coming into your conscious awareness, because your conscious awareness is about your attention, and that's like a flashlight, right? That that is focused on pretty much one thing at a time. And the rest you're in the dark about, even though it's still being picked up by your sensory receptors. And there are ways it can get past the filter. For instance, let's say you're in a room working on something, talking to someone else, and you hear someone else say your name, and you weren't even aware of their conversation, you weren't listening, but you noticed that. Somehow that got up from your echoic store up to your conscious awareness. Psychophysics is the subdiscipline of psychology that studies the relationships between the physical energy that your bodies detect, right? Like light waves, sound waves, vibrations, and how you experience it psychologically. And the father of that discipline is Gustav Fechner, and he was a German psychologist, physicist, and philosopher. And he wanted to relate matter to mind, to connect the objective material world to your privately experienced impression of it. The lowest level of a stimulus that you can detect at above chance performance is called the absolute threshold. So right now you can hear my voice, assuming that my microphone is working, and you don't have a problem with that. But imagine if we turn the sound down. You still hear it. We turn the sound down. You can still hear it. We keep turning it down. Now you're straining to hear my voice. And we keep going down. And there might be a point where half the time that I spoke, you could pick it up, and half the time you'd miss it. And that's what we call the absolute threshold. And there's different absolute thresholds for different senses. And for you to be able to smell something about half the time that it's presented, there needs to be 50 odorant molecules. And for you to be able to perceive that there's a light out there about half the time that it's shown, if that were a candle, it could be as far as 50 kilometers away, which shows that your vision is really sensitive. Another thing that the psychophysician studied was the just noticeable difference. How much do you have to increase a stimulus for the person to notice that there was an increase? So if you're in a bright room and I turn up the lights, how much do I have to turn them up for you to notice that I did that? Well, it's a lot less if we're in a dark room than if you're in a bright room. So if I turned, let's say I'm turning up the lights by the same amount, if we're in a bright room, you might not notice that at all. But if you're in a dark room, that would make a big difference. Okay. And so there's a proportional relationship between the just noticeable difference and the intensity of the stimulus. Okay. And the stronger the stimuli you're being exposed to, the higher the JND is, the more of a change it takes for you to notice that there was a change. But the less of the stimuli there is, then the lower the JND is. The smaller of an increase, a smaller increase is required for you to notice that there was a change. And that is called Weber's law. Signal detection theory is a theory of how you can detect stimuli under different conditions. So when you're hearing my voice, we can consider that the signal. But then there's some noise. Maybe my microphone crackles, maybe something's muffled, maybe you're in the library and there's some background noise around you. And you have to pick that signal out of the noise. And so folks who study this will talk about like a signal to noise ratio. It's possible that the noise could be so high that you couldn't pick out the signal. And when we present a stimulus, a person might report accurately they've heard it. Or they might say, sorry, I'm going to start again. So let's say that you present a stimulus, okay? Let's say you play a tone and it's a faint tone. And the person says, yeah, I heard that. That is called a true positive. And let's say that you play the tone and it's a very faint tone, and they say, no, there was no tone, and we call that a false negative. So they missed it. Let's say there is no tone this time, and they're like, yeah, I heard something. Well, they're wrong. That's called a false positive. And then let's say that, again, there's no tone presented, and they're like, I didn't hear anything. There's nothing there. And we call that a true negative. And we get this kind of table for hypothesis tests in psychology, right? You could falsely reject the null hypothesis of your study. We have this in, let's say, medical tests. Let's say you're being tested for COVID. Well, your test could correctly detect that let's say you actually have COVID, but it could say that you don't have it when you really do. And it could say that you have COVID when you really don't. And that would be a false positive. I'm having a psychic vision. I see you writing midterm number 2, and I'm seeing a question come up that relates to that table. But the vision is fading now, and I'll carry on with the lecture. There is some crosstalk between your senses. Actually, I don't know if that's the best metaphor. It's one from the textbook. Your mind has to process information from multiple sensory modalities, and it doesn't necessarily treat them all equally. Humans are very, very visual creatures, and our visual senses can predominate. They're, in a way, our mind privileges them. And so when there's conflicting information from the senses, right, from vision and touch and sound, your visual system will dominate. And these two illusions demonstrate that. Now, please let me know if this doesn't play, but I do think I've set it up properly. Here's the McGurk effect. So I hear one person kept hearing ba, but I definitely heard fa when I saw his lips, when his lips were shaped to say fa. In my experience, when I show illusions, there's often like maybe 1 or 2 people that the illusion doesn't work on. Like there's some illusions where it looks like there's motion, and most people will see that, and some people will be like, "What? That's not moving at all." Okay, so there's a couple of people who didn't, who kept hearing ba, and you kept hearing ba even when you're watching his lips say fa, like he's shaping the F. Because when I look at his lips, making the fa sound, I hear fa. I don't hear ba anymore. I hear the F sound, and it's like, whoa, my ears are deceiving me. So a couple of you kept hearing ba, and you have to, for it to work, you have to be looking at his lips. Like if you're looking away from his lips, then you'll hear ba again. Interesting. Okay, so you were, and I'm assuming that for the other 67 people were all hearing fa or doing something else. All right. So for most people, or for the vast majority of people, your visual system will override your auditory system, and you will actually hear something that you shouldn't be hearing. You'll hear fa instead of ba, even though he's really saying ba, because your brain sees the lips shaped as an F and assumes that you're hearing an F and then constructs that perception. But not everyone will be fooled, which is a good thing. I mean, imagine if there was like a court case or something, and this somebody like was absolutely sure about something they heard, but that actually wasn't what they heard. Makes you think, right? Here is another one, and this is about the visual sense overriding the sense of proprioception of feeling your own body. I'm reading some comments for the chat there, and so there's someone with more of a bias towards auditory processing that didn't get fooled, and so someone didn't realize that he was moving his mouth to look like an F and thought it was a V. But did you hear va instead of ba? Yeah, try it again and see if you hear va. I'm gonna try that. Like, I'm gonna go and watch it again, and I'm going, oh, okay. So maybe some people who thought he was making a va heard a va. Interesting. Okay. Here is the rubber hand illusion. That'd be a fun lab experiment. There is a very astute comment in the chat. A student wrote, I feel like the fact that the experimenter was telling him what he was going to expect would also influence what he's sensing. Excellent comment. And yes, there'd be an expectancy effect as well. So the experimenter, the psychologist there, was kind of coaching him. He's like, now you're going to feel this when I do this. And people who are more suggestible can fall right into that. And there's a state of extreme suggestibility called hypnosis. And hypnosis is real, but it doesn't work on everyone. If you're the kind of person that's really skeptical, hypnosis is not going to work on you. But if you are a suggestible person, then that could be effective for you, assuming that the hypnotist tells you to do something that's the right thing to do. Humans are social animals, and one of our behaviors is obedience. And now I'm gonna read through comments. Yeah, it reminds me of being younger and being tickled. If someone stopped tickling me, then mimicked the hand movement close to my body, I would giggle like I was being tickled and physically feel it. Yeah, that kind of, you have the anticipation or the expectation, and then your brain might almost register it as if it happened. But what these illusions show is that the brain, the mind, has a role in constructing perception, right? It constructs it out of sensation and also out of other information, like your expectancies. And when different sensory systems conflict, it tends to privilege the visual system because we are visual creatures. But, blind people aren't. And I don't know how, things would work for them. I guess you couldn't do this experiment with them because they can't, see the hand or see the shape of the lips. But what if Helen Keller used to listen to people by putting her hands on their lips? And sometimes deaf people can perceive through vibrations. So I don't know. And they also see, deaf people see sign language. So they do have vision. And so it'd be interesting to, study a deaf person and see whether the visual system would also override their sort of feeling or detection of vibrations the way it overrides here, or to compare what happens to different conflicting sensory modalities for blind people. Let's say smell. There is a comment. Hypnosis is fun. I've tried it a bunch of times and it's worked on me 50% of the time. I've noticed that if I convince myself it won't work, then nothing happens. Yeah, because you're in sort of skeptical mode. Like, yeah, this isn't going to work. But if I tell myself to go along with it, then it works. That's suggestibility. I find that most illusions have that effect. They only work when I confirm to myself that they will for some reason. And you're letting it happen. I did not know that Helen Keller was a eugenicist. She was also a person with disabilities, and eugenics was all the rage at the time. And there were a lot of psychologists whose psychology we teach in courses like this that had views that are very unsavory now, that were normal and accepted for the time. What most of us do is go along with what everyone else believes and kind of accept the dominant narrative. So if this were, 1939 in Germany, we'd probably all be Nazis, because that's what everyone believed was the right thing to do. A lot of eugenics has a role in the history of psychology. If you're not familiar with eugenics, it's the idea that only the fittest should reproduce, and people who have disabilities, or people who have low IQ, or people who have criminal records should not be allowed to reproduce, so that you only reproduce kind of the best people in order to create the best human race. And so, as you can imagine, it's super racist and doesn't understand, say, social determinants of crime, super ableist, and it did lead to things like forced sterilization of people with disabilities. There is a history of racism behind IQ testing. What cognitive abilities do we say are the important ones, and who has them, and what happens to the people that don't. And so scientific testing of IQ was used to limit immigration policies to keep America white. I'm going to read the comments now. Was Helen Keller propaganda and fake a lot? Did her handlers speak for her? That's interesting, because we had that happen with what was it? Facilitated communication. And I don't know, like I read the story of Helen Keller when I was in school, and it's very possible that what I was reading was propaganda. I don't know. Yes, I think I had the sense that she was trying to advocate for people, but should be doing that in a society that had different norms and values. And you know what? That's quite possible. She did have a person who was her companion, and that companion met her when she was a child and stayed with her through her life. And a good question is, what was the role of the companion in even in her writing? That's an excellent question. I never considered it. Maybe she was being spoken for. I have one of my best friends has cerebral palsy, and when we hang out, a question that I've gotten a couple times is people will like approach me and just kind of like ignore her, not talk to her. And sometimes people have asked me, like, how much do I get paid? Like per hour, how much you earn per hour to be doing what you're doing right now? Because that looks like it could be a good job, like not too painful, or we were leisurely enjoying ourselves. Yeah, interesting questions about Helen Keller. That'd be oops, sorry, it started playing again. No, stop doing that. There we go. Oops, sorry. That would be a fascinating thing to look into, and I wonder if you could do something like a psychology honors project on that. I don't know if you have to collect data and be experimental or not. Then there's a really interesting condition that involves what they're calling crosstalk between senses. I kind of want to say miswiring, but that makes it sound like it's a disease, and it's not really. So people with synesthesia will, say, experience colors as sounds, or maybe they could taste colors. they might have personification is something that our minds do really, really easily. Like if you have a stuffed animal as a child, you personified that and it was a character. Well, what if that happened for like the number 8 and there was a character for that? And there was a character for number 9. That'd be that must be an interesting way to live. Hey, imagine if every number had a different color. And you know, it could be adaptive. So in this picture over here, all the shapes are in black and white, and it could be harder for us non-synesthetes to pick out which are the backwards shapes. But it'd be really easy to do that if you experience them as having different colors, right? As a synesthete might. Oh, okay. Somebody here has synesthesia. I don't, so I'm talking about something that I don't know about. But if you would like to speak to your experience, you're invited and welcome to do so. You can see sounds. Like, wow, what is it? What does it mean to see a sound? Like, do you see like a wave, or how do you perceive the sound visually? I have no idea because I'm a non-synesthete. But that's fascinating. There's a question. Are people ever lying? People can lie anytime, but there would be ways to measure that. So let's say that you could use this as a test here. So let's say somebody was saying that they could see shapes as colors. Well, you'd expect their reaction time to be way faster. Okay, like if I'm not a synesthete, and if you asked me to do, let's say I was lying about having it, well, it would take me a long time to count out which ones to find, because I'd have to do it like row by row. So, okay, and so the person with synesthesia said it's more just like I see spots of faint colors here and there, and most of the time you just tune it out. Has it ever been like of adaptive value? Like, has it ever helped you out in a situation to be able to see the spot of color when? Or maybe it creates more distractions, and so you tune it out. So after transduction, your brains organize that sensory data into meaningful full concepts. And part of that is based on what's actually in your sensory field. And we call that bottom-up processing. And part of that is based on expectation, like what happened a moment ago. You're going to use that information into your construction of what's happening now. And then the other things are about expectations, okay? Or what happened to you in the past, your beliefs. And we call that top-down processing. And now I'm going to go back to reading the chat from the person with synesthesia, saying that maybe it's not really offering a lot of adaptive value, but it makes life more interesting. So people might ask what colors their names are, which makes for an interesting conversation. I bet it would. Yeah. I'd love to know what color my name is. All right. So your attention, like your focused attention, is very narrow, and it's very and it's very focused. And so in order for you to focus on one thing, you have to tune out a whole lot of other things. And yet that information is still coming into you. It's still going into your short-term memory store. And sometimes it can cross that filter into your conscious awareness. And so we see that when people are given messages, different messages to different ears. So let's say, and they're just told to focus on the message in the right ear. Well, when they repeat back what they heard, sometimes they mix that up with things that were being sent into the left ear that they were instructed to ignore and trying to ignore, but somehow it kind of worked it in. And I'm excited to hear that my name is blue and purpley because that's my favorite color along with teal. we miss a lot of things because of our selective attention, but we have the feeling that we are seeing what's going on. So we're not aware of what we're unaware of. All right, so this is an example, a demonstration of change blindness. Sorry, inattention. A lot of people have seen the gorilla version of this experience. It's very famous in psychology, and so sometimes people have already seen it when they come into an intro psych, and I play it. It's classic, and so that's why I play this one, because most people who look for the gorilla then miss the players leaving or the curtain changing color. And yeah, it's easy to miss things. Yet you have the perception that you were watching and you knew what was going on. And when inattentional blindness relates to something called change blindness, right? That when something changes, you don't notice it. And so I think really this is probably an example of change blindness that's based on inattentional blindness. Change blindness also comes up when you watch a movie and you don't notice little things that are going on that are changing about the actor. So let's say you're watching an actor have a conversation with someone, you're listening to the conversation between the characters. You might not notice that something about the actor's clothes or hair has changed because they're shooting this over a much longer time frame than you're seeing. And next time they come back to film that for the third times over, their button is undone where it was done at before, or they're wearing a different pair of earrings, or their hair is slightly different. We just don't notice those things. So that would be change blindness. Inattentional blindness is like when you didn't watching The Lord of the Rings and you didn't notice the truck that was accidentally left in the scene, or Pirates of the Caribbean. At one point, there's a plane goes overhead in the movie and you just don't notice, okay, because you're focused on what's going on. So that's inattentional blindness. And I think the monkey business illusion is actually a better example of change blindness. So if I give this lecture again, I'll give you a different example for inattentional blindness, probably things being in historical movies that shouldn't be there, that you didn't notice. And then change blindness is when something changes and you don't see that. So there's an experiment where the researchers had a research assistant go up and talk to somebody to ask for directions. And so this is the unwitting research subject who is giving directions to the person. And then another research assistant who's dressed as a construction worker comes through like with carrying some piece of like drywall. And while that interruption is happening, and so somebody's walking past with a piece of drywall, another research assistant comes in and swaps. They switch places. Okay, so first you're talking to this guy with blonde hair, and then while this is happening, a new person who's got a different color shirt and different hair is now talking to you. And most people don't notice that it's a new person. I wonder if, what would happen if you replicated this experiment with like changing the gender or the race of the person. But what I imagine would happen is that, I wonder if you might feel that something's a little off, but then you might reconstruct your memory of what happened before to now be a memory of this person, because your memories are also constructed. We often think of our memories as if they were like a videotape, and every time you bring up the memory, you're playing the videotape again. It's actually not like a tape because it's a construction. And every time you pull up the file, it's like you edit it, and maybe you might mix it up with another memory of a similar thing. Okay, and then you like bunch those up into a new memory, and it's like you file save that. And maybe the file could corrupt a little while it's in the storage. So what you keep bringing up isn't like a copy of a videotape. And so I would imagine that when this happens, your memory of what happened 2 seconds ago, 5 seconds ago gets edited to change the person so that it's now consistent. Just for laughs is fun, and I wouldn't be surprised if they pull something like that. So one of the great mysteries in psychology is called the binding problem. Like, how does your brain actually bring all those different sense modalities together to create your perception? Okay, so let's say you're seeing an apple and it has a look, and there's color, it's shiny, there's a texture to it, there's a smell, it has taste, and those all rely on different sensory modalities and processing in different parts of the brain, but somehow you perceive that as a whole. How does that happen? We don't know that yet. Maybe it's something about rapid coordinated activity in brain areas. Maybe it's something to do with your association cortices, which make up, a lot of your cortex. There was a time that people thought that, you only use like 10% of your brain. I heard that when I was in like high school biology, 20 years ago. It's not true, but a lot of the parts of our brain that we thought we're not using are actually association cortex. Maybe they're doing that. If you gave somebody, let's say that you blindfolded them and they couldn't touch it, and you let them taste a bit of apple flavor, like without the texture of the apple on their tongue, they might not recognize that as apple. If you let somebody smell apple scent out of a bottle, but you didn't label the bottle at all, they probably couldn't guess what that scent was. But if you told them it's apple, then, and they sort of imagine an apple, they pull up the memory of apple, and they're like, oh yes, of course, it's apple, wow, yeah.